Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my Nostalgia Dive series, a project where I go back and dig up bits of my childhood all the way up to my young adult life, all for the purpose of sharing it here with you on the internet. For this month's topic, I decided to revisit another game from the past, the platforming, graffitiing, escape from the police em up game, Jet Set Radio. So as it goes here, I like to talk about my connection to the game first. After, we will get into the development of the game, followed by mechanics and gameplay. Talk a bit about the story since it is a little bit more in depth than my last video, and finally we will talk about some of the goods and bads related to the game, as well as wrapping it up with my own personal score rated between 1 and 5. I would also like to mention that a little over half of my film while playing this game was corrupted in the process, and thus so I replayed the game twice. The second time I used cheat codes. Those codes were infinite time and unlimited spray cans, so if you see a frozen timer or spray cans not going up or down, then that's why. Aside from that, let us jump into none other than Jet Set Radio. Starting with my connection to the game, I unfortunately didn't own this game originally. I actually played this one at a friend's house and we would take turns playing it on his original Xbox. I'd say at this point in my life, I was probably somewhere between 12 and 14. By this time, I had played a majority of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series and more than likely had began playing the Underground series as well. When my friend talked to me about the game at school, that's pretty much how he described it, that it was like Tony Hawk. The point system was the same, you could do tricks, except you had rollerblades, you could spray paint the walls, all while police and other gangs caused you issues. With that, I was sold. I had conquered the streets the Tony Hawk games could offer me. I couldn't imagine this Tokyo-to place would be too much different. Somehow, even though the way he described it to me fit the bill at its most basic of parts, I had no idea what I was really in store for. I came over right away after school and I got to work on figuring this game out. I watched them play for a time before they handed me off the Duke controller that we were playing it on. I kid you not, I had played the game at his house for about 5 hours straight. I became a Jet Set Radio fan almost instantly. I had the pleasure of borrowing it from him a few times, but the difficulty curve beat me down pretty hard back then. Another game I could not beat as a kid. Fortunately, early on in my PC gaming career, I learned that the game had been put on Steam. I believe I bought the game in mid to late 2013, and like most of one's Steam library, it had sat there collecting dust for some time. One day, about a year after I had purchased it, I tried it out, and I couldn't use the keyboard, so I gave up. A few months later, I had purchased a controller to use for my PC, and I realized now I could play the game. So I fired it up and tried it. I played the first 2 levels before I moved on to do something else, and still never beat it. So for this nostalgia dive, I went all in to beat this game I never finished back then, and I must say, it took a lot of strength to do so, and we will get into that once we are in the goods and bads of the game. However, I do want to stress I have in fact listened to the OST of this game and its sequel for a majority of my young life into full-on adulthood. Naganuma Sensei's work have inspired me and thousands of others to expand our taste in music for decades, bringing us back to when I was just a kid. Punk, metal, nu metal, and a peppering of hip-hop was all I really had been into, and with a lack of internet access back then, along with my dumb kid brain being unable to go out and expand itself for the better, I only had video game soundtracks to really help with expanding my music taste, and I'm sure that others feel the same way. So now that you understand my initial connection to the game, we can get into Jet Set Radio's development. Initially, Jet Set Radio's original release was back on the Dreamcast. It was released first in Japan in June of 2000 and in other countries later that year. The game was developed by a company called Smilebit, with their publisher being Sega themselves. Smilebit at the time was a very small, first-party developer to Sega. It is also said that officially they were Sega's R&D team going under the official name AM6. Smilebit was Jet Set Radio, going so far as to calling themselves the Jet Team, and it shows as they only really developed things related to Jet Set Radio. Back to the game and its development, Jet Set Radio was announced only a year before its release at the Tokyo Game Show in 1999. It was revealed initially that they wanted to make the game in the style of Parappa the Rapper with the same type of manga comic book style. Based on what I found, it seems Jet Set was inspired by a lot of different games. SM64, Ocarina of Time, and recently in an interview, 1080 Snowboarding. To help assist in the sales of the game internationally, Sega suggested adding 2 other levels into the game to appeal to Americans and others outside of Japan, Bantam Street and Grind Square. Cell shading was originally not the choice for the game's graphic design, but it was believed that this was the best way to express Ryuta Ueda's artwork. After Ueda-sensei showed his artwork of his characters to Masayoshi Kikuchi, it was decided to base the atmosphere of the game around those designs. After 10 months of cooking in that small yet effective studio, Jet Set would release first in Japan on June 29, 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast, followed by US in October of the same year, as well as the EU in November, and then the AU in December. In 2012, the HD version of the game was released both in the US and PAL versions, with Japan's HD release sometime in 2013. The HD version of the game that was once on Steam, more on that later, is what I used in the making of this video, as the differences were very slight, except a few tracks and some of the graffiti was no longer in the game due to licensing. Aside from the finer details I will speak about later, let's get into the gameplay and mechanics. Jet Set Radio plays a lot like an arcade cabinet game in my opinion, mainly because the game is mission-based, and those missions themselves are timed. Depending on the mission, these can be very short, like the showdowns against other characters, to some of the endgame missions which max out the timer to basically 1,000 seconds, and in some cases, you need that full amount of time. So no mission is longer than almost 16 minutes, which isn't bad for this kind of game. It's very easy to pick up and put down when needed, with having no issues coming back to it at a later date. The main missions have you going around different sections of Tokyo-to to tag the area and claim it as your own turf. A big red arrow will hover over the main tagging spots, while there is also bonus green arrows for extra points. There are different sizes of graffiti spots as well, some only taking one input to quickly spray and move on, while others are full-on QuickTime events, inputs similar to the old God of War games. Unlike mashing the face buttons in God of War, the QuickTime events only have you using the left analog stick to throw up your tag. These tags, by the way, are completely customizable. I've seen plenty of screenshots putting random images or custom Jet Set styled art to replace the old ones. This can be changed in the main menu of the game from what I can tell. Spray cans can be collected throughout the game's levels. Orange ones give you 1 can, while blue ones give you 4 or 5. There's another spray can that is red, which actually refills your health partially. You can only hold so many spray cans depending on what character you play as, so if you run out, you'll have to go back out there and get more. Unlike the Tony Hawk games, tricking is done automatically. If you grind a rail or get enough airtime, the player character will do a spin or a flip, kick their feet out, etc. I'm not sure exactly what the conditions are for them to be more likely to perform a trick. However, to me it seems like going fast or catching big air, they were more likely to do so. Another small part of moving around some of these levels is you are able to sketch on the back of the vehicles, much like Tony Hawk as well. Unfortunately, I only really did this during the beginning part of the game, as it seems pretty hit or miss if your character would actually attach to the back of said vehicle. Jumping around seems to be the primary way of getting around. Doing a dash followed by jumping would allow me to gather speed without needing to grind or go downhill without many issues. There are 3 different types of missions in this game. There are primary missions, side missions with their own type of completion requirements, and then there are showdowns, which task you with either racing potential unlockable characters or copying their moves. After you beat them at whatever type of mission they're in, you can play them through the rest of the main game. The player will also find plenty of collectibles in the game as well. The game calls these graffiti souls, which unlock new images to use for your tags. I believe these also unlock other additional content in the bonus section of the main menu as well. Another major part of the game is its enemies. You have Police Captain Onishima with his revolver, SWAT teams, police with tear gas, and it just escalates from there. Helicopters, men on jetpacks, men with flamethrowers, dudes that shoot lightning, dudes posted up on roofs over Tokyo-to with sniper rifles, all to take out these punks on roller skates. Depending on the mission, for example, your main missions, the level ends when you tag all the areas with red arrows. The game then totals up your score. It takes into account a few things from the looks of it: how much health you've ended up with, how much time was left, and how many spray cans you were holding on you at the time, as well as points you got for doing stuff during the gameplay of the level, doing tricks, spraying the green arrow tag locations, as well as taking out or stunning any of your pursuers. The game will then proceed to provide you a rank based on your point total, Jet being the highest. This doesn't seem too hard to achieve aside from a few stinky ass levels, but aside from that, you now have an idea of the overall game loop. Let's go ahead and go into the story of the game. It isn't as short as Sheep Raider was, but it isn't as long as your typical Asterian fanfiction either. I'd say for an arcade type game like this, it has a solid length. I'd say before we go further now, if you haven't played the game and have the means to do so, go ahead and do that now. Play it. Spoiler, but it's well worth the time and frustrations you may face. Now let's get into the story. The game starts off narrated by our friendly neighborhood pirate DJ Professor K, who seems to live in Tokyo-to itself. He actually talks about a few key points you will see quite a bit in this game. Skate punks, collectively called Rudies, who wear high-tech inline skates powered by magnet-release Kekkei Genkai from Naruto, and his own pirate radio station Jet Set Radio, which we get to experience between the main missions of the game. Professor K is voiced by a guy named Billy Brown. The main credits for his VA work look to be just Jet Set Radio and other games which reuse Professor K's archived dialogue. Anyway, these Rudies like to express themselves by painting the town with their graffiti. To everyone's surprise, this isn't accepted by normal standards, and so the metropolitan government, along with a financial conglomerate known as the Rokoku Group, have created a project to stop this self-expression known as the 21st Century Project. Great title. This is all boiling over as the police, go figure, have been taking extreme measures to take care of these Rudies. After this little introduction, we start a section of the game in Shibuya-cho, where Beat, our primary character and frontman for the Jet Set IP, is gathering up a posse to settle this little slice of Tokyo-to as his turf. After doing some small challenges facing off against potential recruits Gum and Tab, the GGs are formed. We move on to our first physical appearance of Professor K. He mainly talks about the gangs that make a mess of Tokyo-to. Poison Jam, the Noise Tanks, and Beats Gang, the GGs. In this little broadcast from Professor K, he talks about how the GGs were attacked by one of these other gangs on their home turf. He also foreshadows that Police Captain Onishima and the rest of the police have somehow gotten a warrant for these kids and are looking to arrest them. This sets us up for our first mission of the game, which also happens in Shibuya-cho, the GG's home turf. You really get into the meat of the game here. Respraying your turf, you see that neither of the mentioned gangs are the ones trying to take over Shibuya-cho. It's a different gang trying to move in. After spraying for some time, Captain Onishima and the team of baton-wielding, shield-carrying SWAT appear to mess up your time, trying to keep control of your home turf. The SWAT will try jumping on you while Onishima tries his best Cassidy impression by shooting you with his revolver, and given the size of the damn thing, I hardly believe it is a police issue. Dodging Onishima and the SWAT while finishing marking up your territory, you have completed level 1. Congrats! After this, we experience another Professor K cutscene. It turns out, as I'm sure any competent player would know, it was not Poison Jam or Noise Tanks. It was actually a third gang that wasn't revealed to us yet, a gang called the Love Shockers. Once the GGs figure this out, they go out for a little revenge. Now this part is quite interesting, as you now have the option to go after any of the three gangs. For the playthrough film through this video, I thought it would be common sense to just go after the Love Shockers, as they are the ones that encroached on our turf. Now I will tell you that this level is probably the worst in the series. If you can beat this level, then you will be able to beat all other levels in this game without a doubt in my mind. Depending which mission you take here, something different will happen to the GGs. If you go after Love Shockers or Poison Jam, then the Noise Tanks will steal the GG's dog, Potts. If you go after the Noise Tanks first, then Poison Jam will fill the GG's garage with frogs. Either way, it doesn't affect the game other than to show progression through the story while in the GG's hub area. So doing these levels and claiming the territory of these gangs, you will discover a few things. Defeating the Love Shockers will drop a golden rhino badge.
Wow.
Defeating the Noise Tanks, they drop a piece of a record.
Wow.
Defeating Poison Jam, they also drop a record. However, these Poison Jam guys get shoved into a mysterious black car. It is assumed they have been kidnapped. In between these missions, we also have to deal with some showdown missions. These missions are where you unlock some characters that will join the GGs. In this chapter of the game, it was Graham, Mew, and Yo-Yo. The first two, with Graham and Mew, were fine. Then the first showdown race with Yo-Yo. These races were some of my least favorite parts of the game, Yo-Yo's being the worst. I actually looked up guides for each race to figure out what the best route, as the game gives you no direction on where to go. I understand they didn't want to do a whole lot of hand-holding on what to do and where to go. These races definitely should have been a possible exception. I used all these characters at least once each time they were unlocked, and only finding a few that I really enjoyed. I guess I should mention each character has their own stats: power, technique, and graffiti. I never really looked into which one did for what character, but I always assumed more power meant more health, which is vital in later missions. Anyway, defeating the missions will reveal quite a bit about what's going on outside of this little gang war. Professor K, for example, will reveal that the Golden Rhino badge is an affectation of the Golden Rhino gang, an Asian gang of killers, and it's possible they have been the ones to take Poison Jam away. Professor K also hits us with a little bit more information on the Rokaku group, and he also begins speaking candidly about its leader, Goji Rokaku, and what's going on a little more in depth about this Rokaku project. At this point though, Professor K isn't too worried, so we won't be either, because after this we go into Chapter 2. Chapter 2 actually starts with two other potential recruits to the gang, Combo and Cube. They're actually here to get help from the GGs, however, as they have had issues with their old turf, Grind City. Beat, however, offers a trade with them. Join the GGs and tell us what's going on. So right off the bat, in this chapter, you have two showdown missions in a row this time. However, you play as Combo and Cube trying to get into the GGs. By this time, it is relatively simple to do so. Once you clear the two showdowns, Combo talks to the GGs about what the hell's going on in Grind City. Around 2 months ago, Grind City began being overtaken by strange graffiti, which was being placed all over Cube and Combo's tags. Combo also talks about another member of their old crew going by the name of Coin, who was kidnapped, along with his record collection being completely destroyed. Combo also states that the Golden Rhinos have taken up residence in his old turf inside of Grind City, Bryan Square, and Bantam Street. I should also mention all of this is happening in a flashback where you play as Combo or Cube, trying your best to retake these locations from the Golden Rhinos. Apparently at this time, Coin had left a message for Combo, one that both him and Cube could not decipher at the time. Coin painted a golden rhino and mentions Jet Set Radio, telling the two to head to Tokyo. And with that, Cube and Combo end up in Tokyo and meeting up with the GGs, putting us up with current events. This is actually the end of Chapter 2. With all this information, the GGs plan their next move. Starting Chapter 3 again with another info dump by Professor K, the GGs and the player find out that the Golden Rhinos are actually part of the Rokaku group, and that their primary goal is to go after anyone still out on the streets of Tokyo, essentially scaring the place into a form of martial law. After doing one or two more missions, it is revealed to us that the Golden Rhinos are searching for the record we've been gathering, a record called the Devil's Contract. Supposedly, this Devil's Contract has the ability to summon a demon and gain ultimate power. Tokyo is being turned upside down, with many being reluctant in thinking that the GGs and their graffiti will do anything. After doing a few more missions to cover up the Golden Rhino propaganda around town, the Rhinos manage to steal the record from the GGs. Doing a few more missions, one where you must defeat Poison Jam once more, the GGs are able to get information from one of the Poison Jam's defeated members. Poison Jam actually talks about Goji, leader of the Rokaku group, and that he plans on using the record to take over Tokyo. One of our last broadcasts from Professor K encouraged the GGs to head to the Rokaku HQ and destroy the record. During this chapter, we also get the last few members of the GGs as well, that is, outside of doing the side missions, which are Piranha and Slate. The last part of the game has us placed at the top of the Rokaku HQ with Goji in the middle of a large spinning record in a DJ booth surrounded by dancers, with 4 paths that branch off to other parts of the roof. Now, if you've been in the gaming space for some time, this will be one of, if not the easiest boss battle you will ever face in your entire life. Goji will remain in the center. All you have to do is go to those other branching rooftops and spray graffiti on them 4 times. The only threat here is sometimes a giant rhino will breathe fire if you are not fast enough. Every time you spray one of these, the record in the center gets faster, increasing the potential of you falling off and taking damage. Once you get all 4, the top of Goji's DJ booth breaks open, and then all you have to do is jump in there and spray a logo on his bald-ass head. That's it. You've won the game. Easy enough. With Professor K speaking with us one last time, Rokaku blames a construction incident on the whole thing, with Goji literally dying and falling off the building. Goji's son takes over Rokaku, and Tokyo begins to go back to the way it was at the beginning of Chapter 1. After this, you can reload the save and it will literally take you back to Chapter 1. However, I thought this was cool, is that you get to keep all your characters, any side missions you didn't complete will be on the map, and you can finish up whatever you haven't done yet. There are other characters you can get by doing the side missions, namely a gang member from each of the rival gangs, Goji, the big baddie himself, and Potts, your dog. Aside from that, you can just endlessly go through the game as much as you want or as little as you want. So, with the story at its close, we will move on to the goods and bads, my score, and I have one last thing to talk about in regards to this game at the end as well, which might be rather important depending on your thought about games preservation. So this time I will start with the bads and then get into the stuff I love about this game. The list of bad stuff is all written down in the moment-to-moment gameplay while I record, so it remains fresh when I write up my commentary. The first thing I'd like to say is I would love to see a dedicated retry button in the pause menu. This would be similar to the retry button in the Tony Hawk games if you fail the mission. This is more for the missions like the showdowns where you know you're not going to win, or if you start to do one of the trials or main missions and it goes poorly and you know you're about to run out of time. The alternative that they have for you in this game is that you have to completely exit back to the level select. Start over that way by selecting your character and reloading back into the mission. This really blows in my opinion, as I lost or failed quite often either by losing health or running out of time. One other thing is the difficulty curve. Earlier in this video I mentioned the game does not hold your hand at all, and while I enjoy this most of the time in games, Daggerfall and Morrowind being good examples of this, when the first level goes from SWAT team with batons and shields to potentially helicopters with missiles, depending on which level you do next, the amount of things going on all at once can become quite overwhelming. Next on the list is the rival gang missions. These missions task you with chasing the rival gang members of the territory and spraying them with your paint 10 times a piece, 30 in total. You have to do this 3 or 4 times in the game, twice for Poison Jam. I feel like having this one or two times would have been okay, with other challenges being like trick offs or whoever could tag the most areas first. In my opinion, these missions seem rather tedious and at first difficult until I gained more experience with the game, which isn't too big of a deal. I just felt it slowed down the pace of the game and we could have had a potentially better challenge for it. Maybe something that involved the themes of each gang or something similar. So, to go along with the difficulty curve of the game, since I didn't mention it before, is the tutorial of the game. At the main menu of the game, there's a tutorial option. I'm not sure, however, if I would call it such a thing. Honestly, I wouldn't even bother with it until later when you felt you have mastered the mechanics of the gameplay of the game for a bit. Consider it a potential final challenge, if anything. It teaches a few basics and then goes into the more advanced tactics of Jet Set Radio, which could be useful right off the bat if you could retain information like that, but I'd say learning the game by playing through it organically would be the best way to learn. Another thing I had issues with was the game detecting if I was close enough to spray at a graffiti spot. There would be a lot of times, especially Grind Square, where I'd go to spray a tag and it would only have the graffiti pop up happen for a split second, or maybe not at all. Sometimes you would have to be right on top of it for it to even register. Sometimes, since the graffiti button on the controller is the same as the center camera behind player button, I would be spamming the button while going by and it would basically turn the camera in a way where I was unable to spray that location, which kind of places me at my next item, which is slightly more refined controls. Your character has problems jumping or getting the wall rides right sometimes, or when you are trying to stop quick, it's not always quick enough. Now, this is more for the HD release I played. I wish that Sega and Blit, the people who worked on the HD release, had refined what was already there. I know that this was only a remaster, so they didn't really touch anything aside from graphics, but I feel it would have made the challenge of getting around the levels a lot less frustrating. Then the last thing, which isn't really bad, but it's the Goji fight at the end of the game. I didn't feel like it was too satisfying of a fight. I know I wasn't a fan of the helicopters with missiles and stuff, but the only thing that attacks you here is the dancers and the giant golden rhinos on the other parts of the roof, and all they did was one attack. There was no second phase or anything like that whenever you progressed further into the fight. The only real thing that changed was the record you stood on at the center roof, which would spin a little faster. Even then, it wasn't too much of a problem except for getting to the last tag. Shit, Goji himself didn't have any attacks, and if he did, then he never did them while I was fighting him. That's all I have to say that is even remotely negative about the game, and most of the good that stems from this brilliant game is in its style. Cell shading back then was in fact something they were doing at the time. However, it was still relatively new from what I could find, and in the time that Jet Set came out on Dreamcast. The levels were made with a ton of care, and this place, this futuristic Tokyo city you find yourself in, I'm sure looked futuristic to a lot of people back then. Even though we can see the style cropping up in the real world nowadays, the skylines, the tight buildings, and the little bit of technology we get to see all fits in a way that you believe this would be many years in the future. More on the style, the characters are all fantastically designed. Each character has a style, and with what little voice lines they have, they match in personality as well. Beat and Gum, the first of three characters, the other being Professor K, are well known in many communities. People may not know their names, but they may have seen their style, or hell, even in other games. I remember seeing Beat in Sonic All-Star Racing back in the day, and the whiplash I got was enough to remind me of Jet Set Radio itself. Much like I was talking about earlier in the connections part of the video, was Naganune Sensei's original music for the game. Strumming the bass line is a song that I frequently hum to myself some days while I'm at work. Not to mention some of the licensed music as well. They even got a remix version of Dragula by Rob Zombie in the game. I believe this is one of those inputs by Sega to get more sales in America, but it really helped you separate Grind City and Tokyo To from each other. I also have to talk about Professor K himself. His exposition between levels and helping the GG stay grounded as the people that, as the player and the people of Tokyo To should be rooting for, there is a huge message that comes from this game, and I think it has built a pretty big foundation for my other ideals to stand on, and Professor K expresses that in-game as well, which is self-expressionism. I believe, and still believe to this day, going against the grain and the crowd is not only a brave path to lead, but allows you to expand yourself and learn what it really is to be alive, and I think personally that is a huge thing we could all continue to grow. In a current day society where following trends and hopping on the bandwagon is quite common, I think being a person among the crowd, the creator of those trends, the overthinker, the ones who push beyond the limits of what it means to live and be free, I think the world could always use more of those kinds of people, no matter what stage of life we find ourselves in. It's never too late to do something you love. I know this is coming from someone who's definitely not the only person to do a review essay video about a semi-obscure video game, but I believe in this wholeheartedly. Nothing is wrong with following trends or going with the crowd, but remember to leave some room for what you love, things that make you feel unique. Someone could do a retrospective or essay for a game or show or anime I will be covering here, and it will be different because they've had a different experience with it. Be yourself, your true self. That is what I got from this game. So for helping me rediscover this, along with the style, a bit of the story we get, I will give this my first perfect score. As an adult, I would gladly play this game as I am now. I had a ton of fun, 5 out of 5. Wow. But I'm not really done. I will also let you guys know that this game got a sequel, one that did not get a re-release, Jet Set Radio Future, which also bleeds its style into your eyes. However, it wasn't a true sequel, it was more of a retelling of the original story. I may cover it here one day in another video outside of the Nostalgia Dive series, but this game never left the original Xbox, and to this day has had no plans of getting a re-release. Which brings me to an important part of this video, and something I really wanted to talk about. This game was on my list for this project, but it got pushed up because of a recent bit of news that caught my attention, and by the time this video comes out, it'll already be too late. You see, December 6, 2024, Sega has made the decision to delist this game along with other games involved in the Sega Heritage Project. Every Genesis game, along with Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi, and a few others as well. It is in my opinion that Sega is doing this so that way when you search these games you will buy the new versions that will be coming out sometime later, which have already been announced. I believe in games preservation, especially if it is through official channels. However, I also believe that retaining the original games as they had been designed in the first place are also very important. I will let you know now that after the 6th of this month, which has already happened by the time this video comes out, you will no longer be able to get Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi, or any of these other titles through these official channels. I'm not telling you to pirate these games, but if you just so happen to stumble upon a file sharing site that just so happens to leave these games files on them, I didn't see anything. So I apologize, viewer, if you wanted to get the original Jet Set experience, you will more than likely have to buy the physical game that will one day break, scratch, or rot away, not knowing when they will. That's all I will say about it for now, so as to not get you in trouble, but do what you need to do to experience the joy that is Jet Set Radio. And with that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment, and especially if you have any memories about playing Jet Set Radio. I'd really like to see what others' opinions about the game are. Let me know what your opinions on the delisting of these games. I would definitely like to see what other people are saying. Aside from that, I will see you next month, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your year. Peace.